Snow lashes the North Atlantic like a whip. The wind moans through timber beams. Inside a Viking longhouse, the firewood pile is down to crumbs. So, when winter dragged on and the logs ran out, how did they keep the cold from winning? Tonight we crack open the Vikings' heat playbook, from houses built like giant thermoses to peat blocks that smolder for hours. From stone and earth heat traps underfoot to animal fat lamps that turn a single flame into a room-sized blanket. And nope, they didn't toss wet river rocks into the fire. That's dangerous, and they knew it. If native teepees could stay warm in a blizzard, Vikings had their own answer when wood was scarce, and you can borrow the same ideas for blackouts or winter camping. Bundle up, step inside, listen for the crackle, because the smartest heat isn't a bigger fire, it's a better design. Picture this. A Viking settlement in Iceland or Norway buried under snowdrifts as tall as a man. Their homes, the Longhouses, weren't just wooden barns. They were survival machines. Imagine a rectangle stretching almost the length of a football field, roofed in thick sod, and thatch walls packed with earth and timber. Step inside and you'd smell smoke wool and damp earth. Firewood was the heartbeat of the longhouse, but in the far north, it was often scarce. Iceland in particular had so few trees that burning logs every night was a luxury. So the Vikings had to think differently. Instead of wasting heat, they trapped it. Instead of relying only on wood, they turned to peat moss, nature's slow-burning battery. If you've ever been winter camping and realized your firewood pile was running out, you know that sinking feeling. For the Vikings, that moment wasn't an inconvenience. It was life or death. And what they came up with feels less like medieval history and more like a survival hack we could still use today. When you step into a Viking longhouse, you're not just entering four walls and a roof, you're stepping into an ancient insulation strategy. These weren't cabins thrown together in a hurry. They were engineered for survival. First, the Vikings knew the ground itself was a steady ally. Many longhouses were sunk partly into the earth. Why? Because the soil holds a constant temperature. Even in the dead of winter, a few feet down, the earth is warmer than the air above. By digging their homes into the land, they borrowed that hidden warmth, like tucking the whole family under the world's biggest blanket. Then came the walls. Picture thick timber beams, but the real trick wasn't wood. It was what they stuffed between the cracks. Clumps of moss, mud, and even animal hair filled every little gap. That meant no icy drafts whistling through the boards. Instead, the walls became living insulation, breathing just enough to keep smoke moving out while trapping heat inside. Imagine lying on a fur blanket while outside the storm howls at 20 below. Your breath might frost in the air near the doorway, but deeper inside the longhouse, the warmth lingers. That's the genius of Viking design. Keep the cold outside, keep every scrap of heat inside. Modern campers still use the same principle. Ever piled snow against the side of a tent to block the wind? That's Viking thinking. Ever built a shelter half dug into the earth on a cold night? That's the same hack 1,000 years old. So no, survival wasn't only about burning more firewood. Sometimes the smartest fire is the one you never have to build, because your shelter itself is doing half the work. At the very heart of every Viking longhouse burned a fire. Not tucked in a corner, not hidden behind a wall, but right in the middle of the floor. This wasn't just a place to cook stew. It was the pulse of the home, the sun around which the entire family revolved. Picture the scene, a dim hall, rafters blackened with soot smoke curling upward and slipping out through a hole in the roof. Children and elders huddle close, their breath clouding in the cold edges of the room. In the center, the hearth glows, casting light, cooking meals, and radiating just enough warmth to keep frostbite at bay. The Vikings understood something campers know today. A single well-placed fire can do triple duty. It cooks your food, dries your clothes, and warms your bones. But here's the clever part. By placing it in the center, heat reached every corner of the longhouse, not just one lucky side. Of course, smoke management was tricky. Some people imagine longhouses choked with fumes, but the roof vents and high ceilings acted like a natural chimney. It wasn't perfect. You'd come out smelling like wood smoke, but you'd also come out alive. Think about winter camping. Ever sat by a campfire not just to grill, but to thaw your boots and keep your spirits up? That's the same survival wisdom the Vikings practiced every single night. Their hearth was more than firewood and flame. It was community survival and comfort in the middle of an endless Arctic night. So when the logs ran low, the hearth still gave them a fighting chance, turning one small blaze into the heartbeat of an entire house. When the forest thinned and logs became scarce, the Vikings didn't simply throw up their hands. They turned their eyes to the ground itself. In Iceland, especially where trees were few and far between, the answer lay in peat moss. Peat is earth soaked with centuries of decayed plants, spongy brown and heavy when wet. But once cut into blocks and dried under the northern sun, it transformed into a slow-burning fuel. Imagine stacking those bricks by the hearth, not as flashy as firewood, but they smoldered for hours, glowing like coals in a blacksmith's forge. For a Viking family, peat was more than backup. It was a lifeline. You could cook a stew, keep embers alive through the night, and wake up to a house still breathing warmth. Think of it as the battery pack of the Viking world, a natural power bank long before electricity. Modern campers may smile at the idea, but the principle is familiar. Ever use charcoal instead of wood for a long, steady cook? Same logic. You trade roaring flames for a consistent heat that lasts. And unlike wet logs, properly dried peat won't pop or explode, so no, they weren't tossing dangerous river stones into the fire. The Vikings knew better. Picture yourself lying in a longhouse wrapped in furs. Outside, icy winds scrape at the walls. Inside, the hearth glows with blocks of peat, giving off a steady pulse of heat. It's not luxury, it's survival. And it proves again that sometimes the smartest fire isn't the brightest, but the one that lasts till morning. When wood was precious and peat supplies ran thin, the Vikings reached for something humbler, but no less powerful fat. Animal fat and fish oil were more than food. They were fire in a bottle. Picture a carved stone or clay lamp filled with rendered fat from cattle, or the oily reserves of cod and seal. Drop in a twisted bit of wool for a wick, light it, and suddenly a flickering flame appears. It's small, but it lasts. These lamps could burn through the long polar night, glowing like a pocket-sized sun, while giving off a steady trickle of warmth. For a Viking household, this was clever multi-purpose survival. The same lamp that lit the table also dried damp gloves and kept frost from forming on the inside walls. Think of it as the Viking version of today's emergency candle or portable heater. Not blazing, not glamorous, but reliable when the world outside howled with ice. Modern preppers will recognize the trick. Ever used a tuna can stove or dripped wax into a jar for a DIY heater? That's Viking thinking, turning everyday resources into long-burning heat. And just to be clear, no, they weren't tossing random oils or river rocks into the fire. They understood what worked and what could explode. Imagine lying in Fur's storm, rattling the roof beams, while a single fish oil lamp paints golden light across the hall. It didn't make the house toasty, but it held the edge off deathly cold. And in survival, sometimes that thin margin makes all the difference. Even with peat smoldering and lamps flickering, the cold could still bite. That's when the Vikings turned to the oldest heater of all the human body. Inside a longhouse, beds lined the walls, simple wooden frames piled with straw wool and thick animal furs. These weren't just blankets. A bearskin or reindeer hide was like nature's electric blanket, trapping heat so well you could almost forget the storm outside. Imagine curling into that cocoon, the smell of smoke in the rafters while the wind screamed beyond the earthen walls. But the real secret wasn't just the hides, it was togetherness. Viking families slept close, sometimes side by side, letting body heat mix under layers of fur. Survival experts today call it the human furnace, but for them, it was simply life. In a world without space heaters or down sleeping bags, warmth came from each other. If you've ever camped in winter, you know this instinct. Two people in one sleeping bag or friends huddled under one tarp stay far warmer than each on their own. That's Viking logic in action, a survival hack that never goes out of style. And just so no one gets the wrong idea, no, they weren't tossing wet river stones into bed for heat. They knew that was risky. Instead, they leaned on what they had: fur, straw, wool, and family. Picture a longhouse at midnight, the central fire low, the peat embers glowing, and whole families breathing in rhythm beneath heaps of fur. Not glamorous, but life-saving. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting the cold. It's about holding on to each other until the sun returns. Now here's the fascinating part. Across the ocean, Native American tribes in the north were solving the same problem: how to stay warm through brutal winters, using almost the exact same philosophy. Take the earth lodges of the Plains tribes. These weren't flimsy huts. They were half-buried domes of earth and timber with thick sod piled on top. Just like Viking longhouses, they relied on insulation first, fire second. Step inside and the temperature difference was dramatic. Outside, snow cutting like knives. Inside, steady warmth radiating from the hearth in the floor. Or look at the teepees of the Lakota and other plains peoples. Animal hides wrapped tight smoke hole above, and a central fire glowing low. The key wasn't a giant blaze, it was controlling heat and draft. Sound familiar? The Vikings did the same. Different continents, different materials, same survival logic. Hold the heat, don't waste it. If you've ever dug a fire pit while camping and let the earth walls trap the heat, you've unknowingly repeated a native and Viking hack. Both cultures knew it's not about chasing the biggest flames, but about building shelters that worked with the land. And just for clarity, neither group was throwing wet river rocks into those fires. That's a dangerous myth. They used earth sod hides and careful venting. Imagine a blizzard sweeping across the Dakota Plains or a gale hammering the fjords of Norway. Two worlds apart, but inside those lodges and longhouses, families stayed alive through the same principle: insulation over firepower. That wisdom carried them through winters that would break most of us today. So what can we take from the Vikings and Native Americans when the lights go out or when the woodpile runs low? Their wisdom is still alive, and it works just as well in a blackout as it did in a blizzard 1,000 years ago. First, think earth and stone. Just like Viking walls or native earth lodges, you can use the mass around you to trap heat. Pile snow against the outside of a tent to block the wind, or heat up dry stones near a campfire and set them close to your bedroll to radiate warmth through the night. And no, don't toss wet river rocks in the fire that can end badly. The Vikings knew better, and so should we. Second layering. Vikings wrapped themselves in hides, natives in furs, and woven blankets. The principle hasn't changed. Multiple layers trap more air, and trapped air means insulation. Two medium blankets beat one heavy one every single time. Third light and heat together. The Vikings burned fish oil. Natives used embers in covered pits. In a power outage today, you can lean on oil lamps, alcohol stoves, or even a single candle inside a clay pot. It won't heat the whole house, but it will take the edge off and give you light at the same time. And finally, eat together, warm together. Both cultures understood that cooking wasn't just for food. The hearth was a communal heater. Even today, a pot of stew simmering in the kitchen makes the room the warmest place in the house. Gather there and you'll be warmer in body and spirit. Sometimes the smartest survival hack isn't to fight winter, it's to borrow ancient wisdom and let the cold know you've done this dance before. So here's the lesson of the longhouse. The Vikings didn't just throw logs on a fire and hope for the best. They engineered survival. They sank their homes into the earth-sealed walls with moss, burned peat, like a natural battery-lit oil lamps from fish and fat, and wrapped themselves in furs while huddling close. They understood that winter wasn't beaten with brute force. It was endured with design, with community, and with every resource nature offered. And that wisdom isn't stuck in the past. If the power goes out, if your woodpile runs low, or if you're camping in the dead of winter, those same tricks still work. Insulation over firepower, layers over bulk, community over isolation. So, what do you think? Want to see more ancient hacks from the Vikings, or maybe the survival secrets of Native Americans, medieval peasants, even the Inuit? Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and let me know which story of survival you want next. Winter's tough, but the old ways are tougher.